Hello and welcome to Couchbase Connect. My name is Michael Reike and I'm on the Couchbase SDK group working on this Java SDK and Spring Data integration. Dennis Rosa is in the Couchbase Developer Advocate group focusing on Java, Couchbase clients, and Spring Data. Together we prepared this presentation to give you an introduction to Spring Data and fill you in on some of the new developments in Spring Data Couch 4. This presentation is pre-recorded, but we are live on the chat to answer any questions that you might have. Just so you can put faces with the names, here we are. Dennis and I work closely together on Spring Data Couchbase and the Java SDK. So these are the things that we'll cover in our half hour here. Why Spring Data Couchbase? A quick overview of it. Challenges of Spring Data Couchbase 3. The new Spring Data Couchbase 4 with new improvements and performance features. How to contribute to the open source project, and a little Couchflix demo, and then questions via chat. So the object of this Spring framework and Spring Data model is to provide a familiar and consistent programming model for data access while maintaining the unique traits of the underlying data store. You'll find a powerful repository and custom object mapping abstractions, dynamic query derivation from repository method names, implementation domain-based classes providing basic properties, and supporting for transparent auditing, including create and last change dates. So what does Spring Data Couchbase offer? So first, it has the query and key value Couchbase APIs, a configurable environment via a configuration class, reduced boilerplate code for connection management. There's a repository pattern for accessing your data via a repository object. There's a template pattern for also accessing your data via generic template code. You can also use the Couchbase Java SDK directly. So in case there's something that you don't find supported in the template or repository or anything else in Spring Data Couch, you can just go right to the Java SDK. You can have generated queries based on the method names, custom queries that you write yourself and just provide the string for the query. Object mapping annotations for customization. There is a Spring Initializer application to help you get started. And there's just below there, that's the link to it. When would you use Spring Data Couch? Obviously, if you're already using Spring Boot to build your application, then just adding the Spring Data Couch dependency to it, and away you go. There's no code repository pattern. So you can use, you have out of the box, you have a number of key value APIs that you can use without writing any wrapper code, anything like that. The connection handling is managed for you. The entities are managed for you. You don't have to write adapters or serializers or anything like that. You can write custom adapters if you want to, but you don't need to. There's generated queries from the repository API from the method names. And there's ease of test framework in IntelliJ. You can just right click on a service that you've made, and it gives you a test class that you'll be able to run. So the first thing I mentioned was a Spring Initializer application. So there's the link for it on this page, and This will give you a whole, everything you need for a Spring Boot application. And you just pick, for using Spring Data Couchbase, you just pick the dependency here on the right-hand side, and you pick your version, language, if you want Maven or Gradle or whatever, and away you go. You download it, unzip it, and you can start using it right away. In the application, in your Spring Boot application that you've started off with Spring Initializer, you can have fully managed connections with the Couchbase database. You just create a configuration class. It has the usual things, the connection URL, username, password, and Couchbase bucket name. There's other options that you can do here. Turn on auto indexing and other things, but this is the basic plain starting point. From there, you also need a business entity for your application. Here I have a user, and it's very simple. I have an ID, username, email, password, and so on. Every entity needs an ID. So in this case, it's called ID, and Spring Data Couchbase figures this out automatically that you want that to be the ID. If it is some other name, you use an @ID field annotation to mark it. There's other annotations you can use here on the fields. If you perhaps the field name is different in the JSON data, you could specify that alternate name in the @field notation. But the only annotation here that's mandatory is the @document. That will get you going. So with the configuration class, you had your connection to the database, and with your entity class or domain class, you had your business object, and in between, you have a repository. So you create this. This is a very simple repository class. It has a repository annotation on it. It extends a CRUD repository. There's other things that you can extend here, but this is the simplest. And with it, just by defining the interface, you will have the key value classes like find by ID and delete by ID and upsert by ID and so on. With the other names, it's as simple. Suppose you want to find a users with a email like that. If I wanted to find everybody that with a couchbase.com email address, I just define this find by email like, and the argument would be the like pattern percent whatever. And that's all there is to it. You don't have to write any more code than this. Spring Data will derive from the name of the method what you're trying to do and generate that query for it. So that's very handy. There's another example, find username. And I have this one returning a optional user. And the other example I have here is if you are, if you have a string query, if you don't want to try and figure out what kind of name that you need here, you can just use this @query annotation and plug in your string. Some placeholders are provided, like select entity will have the select clause in it. The nickel filter will have the predicate for selecting the object type, in this case, the user object type. We'll discuss that a little bit later. This is the purpose is so you can easily store different types of objects in the same bucket. Like you could have users, hotels, orders, and that kind of thing. And this would filter by that type, the class type. And then you just specify a query that you're going to use when you want that nickel executed. And there's also the template. The template API is it's a little bit longer, wordier, but you can maybe be a little bit more precise in what you're wanting to do. Here, I create a couple users. I upsert. I use the upsert by ID and pass them as arguments. Let me go back there. Then I can find them. I can find one of them, or I use the reactive API to also to get one. Here I just put a dot block on the end. You wouldn't normally do that, but just to get the user back here at that point. So I use a fluent type API, so you can see that it just chain on one to the other. Something else that can be chained in here is Couchbase options, such as for upsert, there would be the persistent options, and for a what else can we put in there? Timeout and things like that. So although the Spring Data Couchbase 3 was one of our most popular SDKs, there's a feature growing with the Java SDK as a Java SDK Advanced, and the Couchbase Spring Data Couchbase stayed static. So SDC4, Spring Data Couchbase 4, is a complete rewrite of the Spring Data specification for Couchbase to add more flexibility, improve performance, and better fit for the new upcoming features that will be implemented. So the mapping is easier than it used to be, right? For document is the only mandatory annotation. There are other annotations, but they aren't necessary. They're for different options, and we'll talk about a few of them next. In the string query, I mentioned there was an entity. There's a predicate defined for the entity type for user in this case. And a problem with that is if you repackage your domain object, like move it from one package to another, then that's going to change the name that's stored in the document. And a way to keep that the same, even though you move it around, is with the type alias annotation. So the type alias, in conjunction with a custom mapper, allows you to define whatever you want for that document value to keep it the same regardless of what class or what package you're using. There's also new for 4 is transactions. Here's just a little snippet of code showing credits being moved from one user to another. They're subtracted from user 1 and added to user 2, and it's done in a transaction. So if something happens, you don't end up in a situation where user 1 lost his credits and the user 2 did not get them. The scan consistency option allows you to specify what kind of scan consistency to be used for queries. So here this shows the scan consistency for query being set to request plus. Request plus will let you read back what you have written, which is it's especially useful for when you're writing tests. You insert data and then you read it back to do a query on it right away. So because if the data needs indexing, then whenever you write to it, the response you get back from the write is always, it's almost instant. It just means that Couchbase has received the data that you gave it, the document. What it doesn't mean is that the new data has been indexed yet. So in order for it to be indexed when you read it back, you specify request plus. And so if I was going to do find by my email, this method would ensure that if I just inserted a new record with an email that matched, that I would get it back right away in my query. So by default, it's set to none for performance reasons. And if it's important that you get the document, you be able to do queries on it instantly, then you should be using request plus. In the in templates, you specify options in the Fluent API. There would be a method called with consistency that would take a scan consistency argument. Another new feature is auto indexing. What happens is when the server starts up, it will automatically create the indexes you specify in your bucket. In this example, there's two indices created. The first is a composite query index with the fields ID and name. And this DESC following name is a qualifier. It's indicating that name is to be descending. And the other one is this query index on, it's a simple index on just one field, name. I should mention that. So this is more of a, maybe not something you do in production, something you do more of in testing. On production, you'd create the query on your query index on your buckets once and that would be it. In testing, it's useful if you're started the test, it creates the bucket. Then you want the indexes created on it. You run your tests, and at the end, it deletes the bucket. So this is a way to get those indexes automatically generated in your tests. For performance increases, there's less reflection calls. The first example, it's a 10% roughly improvement by using runtime generated factories to instantiate objects. And the second example is a 25% faster by using runtime generated accessors to interact with the entity instance. You'll find, if you dig around in the code, you'll find accessors used all over the place for accessing entity objects, for accessing parameters, for accessing properties. It's just a handy way to encapsulate them. For a future optimization, this is not available yet, but it's for projections. So suppose you had you wanted only the fields that were, all the fields that you wanted were already in the in an index. So suppose that all you wanted was the username and address, and if these were indexed, then the select would only select the fields that you want. Would only select the fields that you want, and in this case, because they are both indexed, it's called index covered. Then it only has to look at the indexes. It never has to go out and actually get that data from the document. It's already got it in the index. That's just one new feature I wanted to mention. There's other new features going, and we're busy at that. And because it is an open source project, you can contribute to the project. You can examine get the source, look at it, run the, you can run the debugger on it if that helps you. This is where you find it all. And also the issues. The bug database is if you have something a feature that you'd like or something that doesn't work the way you think it should, this is a good place to start. First search, and if you don't find what you want, then you can open a new issue, and we'll look at them pretty much every day, so it won't sit there too long before we get to it. And so I promised a little demo. I have a demo written by Dennis, and it has a name that you might guess what it could do. So it's our Couchflix Demo, and it allows searching for movies. The data comes from the moviedb.org. And here, if I just start off, and I'll do it, maybe search on my favorite actress. Let's do this one. See what movies she has. So it brings up, it searches documents, and it scores the movies that it finds. And we've put in the scoring out here so you can see a little bit what's going on. So just by virtue of her being in the movie as an actor, there's a score of 90 and so on, and it goes down in descending order. If I click on one of these, it's going to give me the details that I can read about. The watch is not implemented. I heard that we'd have to charge money for that, but and some other type. So I can search also on a movie name. Let's see, one of my favorite movies. There's Psycho, and if so different, Psycho 3, American Psycho, and so on. So this Psycho, and it matches exactly the name of this movie, and it scores 99. And then after that, they're much lower, 75, 65, and so on. The demo, if you look inside the demo, it actually uses the Java SDK directly and does not leverage, it uses Spring Boot, but it does not leverage Spring Data Couchbase, except for a little demo part, not the part for doing the movie searches, but there's a little demo part, and you can see how the template and the repository API get used. And switch back to my there we go. Back to my presentation here. And so now we have the time for questions. Before this concludes the recorded portion, I'm going to take questions. But instead of leaving this question screen up, I'm going to switch to the next screen, which has URLs that I mentioned and talked about during the presentation.